Junior Cycle History students, let's look at what life was like in the Soviet Union. Soviet Russia is an example of a communist dictatorship. In a dictatorship, you have one person or party in power. There is strict censorship, so control of the media. They often use violence to maintain power and control, and examples, as we said, would include Soviet Russia and Germany in the 1930s under that mustached Austrian. What separates Germany and Russia is the fact that Soviet Russia was a communist dictatorship. So communism is the idea that the state controls or owns all kind of land, industry, property. Communism appeals to people who are incredibly poor. If you don't own anything, you have nothing to lose with the establishment of communism. In November of 1917, Lenin and the Bolsheviks, or the communists, came to power in Russia in a revolution. Between 1918 and 1921, the Reds, so Lenin and the communists, they fought in the Russian Civil War against the Whites to maintain their power. The communists won, and over the next few years, they tightened their grip on Russia. When Lenin died, a guy called Stalin came along and took over. The communists ruled Russia until 1991, when the communist system collapsed. During this time, the Communist Party held all power in the USSR. Elections were only held to elect different members to the same party. The party controlled the civil service and the media. During the 1930s, Stalin used purges and show trials to get rid of any potential opponents, whether they were real or imaginary. In 1934, an important party member called Kirov was assassinated, so Stalin used this as an excuse to start rounding up opponents. Stalin targeted party members, Red Army commanders and officers, engineers and scientists, civil servants and teachers. The secret police, or the NKVD, arrested thousands, and many people ended up in gulags. Over 20 million people were killed. Life in the gulags was extremely difficult. These labor camps were often located in remote areas such as Siberia. Prisoners worked in incredibly harsh conditions as farmers, miners, factory workers, and this was unpaid labor, so it was slave labor. Stalin also held a series of public show trials of senior party leaders, such as Rykov. The accused in these show trials willingly confessed to charges like treason, largely because they had been tortured and their families had been threatened. During the show trials, most of the accused were executed. In the first show trial, all 16 of the accused were executed. In the second show trial, there were 13 executed and 4 sent to gulags. And in the third show trial, there was 18 executed and 3 sent to gulags. Economic policy was incredibly important to Stalin. Industrialization was his approach to industry. Stalin introduced a series of 5-year plans which set targets to improve industry. Gau's plan set targets for all industries. Each region set targets for factories and mines, and then each manager set targets for individual workers. As a result of the 5-year plan, by 1940, the USSR was the second largest industrial country in the world behind the United States. New industrial cities like Magnitogorsk were built. The urban population grew by 29 million between 1929 and 1939. There was no unemployment. However, the 5-year plans depended on very harsh working conditions, severe punishments, and lower living standards for workers. Collectivization refers to the communist agricultural policy. So collectivization, think of the communists collecting all of the land into kind of large farms or units. So Stalin changed agriculture, or saw the need to change agriculture, because not enough food was being produced. All the land was taken over or collected by the government. Great collective farms were formed, and villagers cooperated in working on them. Many peasants, including kulaks, so middle-class farmers, resisted these changes. Over 500,000 kulaks were killed. Millions more were sent to gulags. Another 6 to 8 million people died due to a famine caused by the conflict between peasants and the government. In the workplace, women were put on more equal footing with men in the Soviet Union. They worked in many stereotypically male jobs such as engineers, labourers and builders. The percentage of women in the workforce was higher than in Western countries. In 1937, 50% of workers were women. 21% of construction workers were female and 70% of healthcare workers. Creches and kindergartens were developed so that both parents could work and contribute to the economy. Child allowances were provided to married couples. Preserving the family unit was encouraged, and in the 1930s, divorce was made more difficult to obtain. Larger families were encouraged after World War II because of the huge loss of life during it. There were more allowances given for larger families, and mothers were honoured as mother heroines. Healthcare was provided for free in the Soviet Union. A huge number of new hospitals were built. There were more doctors per head of population in the Soviet Union than in Britain or the United States. By 1970, 70% of doctors were female. Communists wanted free and compulsory education for all. Stalin wanted children to be of the greatest possible service to the country. This plan, however, was compromised by a lack of teachers and schools. A huge literacy campaign meant that by 1950, almost all of those over the age of 8 and under the age of 50 could read and write. Education was used for propaganda purposes. A textbook called A Short History of the USSR exaggerated Stalin's role in the Communist Revolution of 1917. Youth groups taught communism through sports, such as the Young Pioneers. Housing proved to be problematic. Supply could not keep up with demand. Only 6% of families in Moscow lived in an apartment with more than one room in the 1930s. Life in Russia was extremely difficult during World War II. In 1941, the German army attacked the Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa. Rationing was introduced, and in Leningrad alone, over 700,000 people starved or froze to death. Citizens were encouraged to fight in the Great Patriotic War. So basically everybody, it didn't matter if you were young, old, male, female, you were encouraged to get out and fight. As a result of this, 16.8 million civilians died.